everybody. It's Wednesday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And normally we're here with you on Thursdays, but this is kind of a special edition early this week because secret's out. I'm traveling for work this week. So if we didn't meet you here early, then we would have not gotten to meet you here at all. So Thank you so much for your flexibility, and I always love having everyone join us. But either way, we are going to be here to chat fishing because it is that time of the year.
It absolutely is. It's time of the year for panfish of all shapes and sizes and colors, apparently.
What does that mean?
Well, the crappies are turning black. You know, that everybody loves to see those beautiful black tuxedo crappies up on the in the shallows. You know, just be cognizant. The black ones are the males. Those are the ones that are protecting the nests. So if you are doing catch and release, you know, make sure you get them back in the water pretty quick. But yeah, they're beautiful fish. Bluegills are starting to get their colors. We've seen some awesome pictures lately. We've even caught a few of those really nice pumpkin seeds that are nice and fat. And those, you know, they got a couple weeks yet before the water gets up for their spawn, but they're full pre-spawn right now too.
That is absolutely true. But it's kind of funny because I think, gosh, was it last week or was it our post earlier in the week? There was somebody who was mentioning that the lake that they were on, their fish were spawned out. And so, you know, all we can do is report the conditions that we encounter. And certainly that's why we talk about them, because this time of year, it is going to vary quite a bit. So if you're in the north, it's going to be different than if you're down south. And even those lakes in between are going to have variance depending on if they're very deep or small or big, or, you know, all of those different conditions will play into it. So we happened to be on a lake this past weekend. And it's funny because when we got there, the water temperatures were, gosh, would you say like mid 50s?
Yeah, probably.
But by the end of the day, it was quite a bit of wind, but it was quite a bit of sun, and the water temps were closer. I think we even hit 60.
Yeah. And, you know, and don't forget, like when we're talking about different temperatures and, you know, just down the road, we could go to one lake and we could be seeing 60, even 64 or 65 degrees because the water is only 10 feet deep. And then we go, you know, to the next lake and it's a 50-foot deep lake and it may only be 59 degrees. So, you know, if you are chasing the spawn a little bit, or if you're not having luck on one body of water, you know, don't count out other bodies of water. Skip around, keep track. Especially just think, you know, fish the deeper lakes a little bit later in the spring and then progressively get a little deeper, unless you just have your favorite lake, and then just follow the fish around.
And that was at least for panfish, because the other thing is we know that people are out kind of in force for walleyes. So if that's in Wisconsin, I think you've been able to do that for a week or two or a few, depending on where you're at, right? Minnesota, I think, just kind of got to get at it this past weekend, and I saw quite a few fish caught, and that is awesome. But certainly panfish tend to be a big focus this time of the year, and so at least that is what we were doing.
Yeah. Happy late Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. So that's Minnesota's opener is always on Mother's Day weekend. So hopefully, if you're a fishing mom, hopefully you got out. If you're not, well, hopefully they brought you something nice back from the lake.
That is absolutely true. And I guess with that, I was going to be excited to go fishing this weekend, but I'm going to be out of town. So hopefully you get to go fishing this weekend, because a very fun time of the year to be out. So looking forward to what you have to say as far as a fishing report, and looking forward to hearing what everyone at home has to say as well. So let us know what your water temperatures are, or what you're fishing for, or how that bite is going. Because I think this time of year, a lot of people can get to those fish, whether you're on shore or in a boat or whatever else. So with that, I guess also if you have questions, comments, or things along the way for the show this evening, drop that in the comments. But I am so excited to get to our guest. Let's do that without further ado. So Tom, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Tom.
Thanks, guys. Good seeing you guys again. I know it's been since, I think, the ice shows is kind of when we all hang together, our families away from home, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our family's away from home, but it's like just like seeing fishing family. So it's almost like a reunion.
It is every year.
So funny story, full disclosure to the people at home. We met Tom right before this show to chat. And our connection was great. And then all of a sudden it went crazy. So Tom, it's good to see you back here again. And thanks for your flexibility and tinkering around with your internet. Clearly you are good at fishing and also good with technology issues. So thanks for being able to be here.
Well, let's not push the technology issues. We'll see how it goes through the whole thing. But right now, we'll call it a win. Okay.
Well, just from our previous conversation just before the show, just kind of par for the course for you today, huh?
Yeah, it's I'm out here in western Nebraska, McConaughey region, doing a little bit of guiding, and we had first day was no wind, which for walleye fishermen is a curse. Then we go from that to today was light wind, heavy wind, downpour, hail, and I don't know if my face and nose can get any more sunburnt before I get home, but it's just kind of part of how it is for me for the open water season. So
so that could be a little bit tough to navigate and keep on top of those fish and those ever-changing weather conditions. But even on top of that, I'm going to kind of throw you a curveball. Like, I don't know so many guides that do like what you do and travel so much. Like when you are looking for a guide, or when people at home are looking for a guide, typically they choose an area or they choose a guide as kind of, but I feel like you guide everywhere in the country. Is that true?
yeah, so I always get a couple people a year that'll send an email and be like, I'm looking for a guide trip. What's your availability? And my first response is this for Omaha, Metro, Western Nebraska, South Dakota, or Minnesota? And I always get the question mark. And then the next one is, well, are you not located by Omaha? I'm like, yes. And then they go on to, well, we're looking for when we're at the College World Series. I'm like, okay, well, we can hook you up with that myself, or I have a guy that's a school teacher. So during the summer, he helps me out part-time, especially during the College World Series. We get a lot of our traffic during that time of year. But yeah, my radius is basically South Dakota, Nebraska, and at times Iowa, Minnesota. It's crazy. I put on about 50,000 miles a year on my truck. So,
oh my gosh. So how is it that you get to know so many different bodies of water?
Part of it is just having so many different friends I've fished with over the years. And we used to just kind of be like, okay, let's go here. Let's go there. Let's try this lake. Let's try that lake. And then the other part of it is I enjoy having multiple lakes to guide on because I'm never stuck on one body of water. And as we all know, it doesn't matter how good a fishery you're on, you have the ins and flows of, it could be a mayfly hatch, it can be whatever it may be, dictates what you're going to do for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. For me, if I'll post something like, hey guys, I'm going to be in Webster, South Dakota for the next 2 weeks. These are my dates I have available. If, lodging, we can line up lodging. And when those dates are booked, then I go home. And yeah, as my wife chimed in, I can confirm that. So it's kind of nice because I think some people get an inside look on maybe a little bit more on how to break down a body of water, because guys are always so curious as to how I find success, since I don't live on a lake, or, I only fish a particular lake 5 times a year, and a lot of times in this day and age, our electronics is so far advanced, we can just go back to the basics of the GPS. Our GPS is so more accurate that when you find that piece of structure, or, for instance, out here at McConaughey, I have waypoints from the last 4.5 years on my hummingbird, and they're all, if you zoom out, they're all kind of in a line, like where we troll. It just depends. One year you're on one side of the lake, next year you're on the other side of the lake. So it's once you start developing those habits of marking different areas. Oh, we know we caught fish spring on this end of the lake, fall that, it's really not as difficult as what people, they get overwhelmed at times when they go to a new body of water. They're like, oh, I've never been here. It's going to take me forever to catch fish here. If you just kind of start small and, work from 3 feet out to 10 feet and then 10 feet out to 20 feet, it's amazing how much ground you can cover just driving around side imaging.
Okay, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one of the things I'm hearing you say is to look for patterns. Because, if you're fishing all different kinds of lakes, fish still have preferences. Maybe that's areas they're going to, maybe that's following the forage, maybe that's determined by time of year. But what you're doing is looking for those, I guess, like common similarities between bodies of water to put that together and find fish, even when you haven't been there before.
Correct. And, and I'm very fortunate, I'm not the young man of the sport. I've been around this part of the industry and fishing for a long time. So I have a pretty good network with friends that, over the years I've met or whatever, that live on different lakes or even guide on different lakes that, if they know I'm coming out to guide for a couple weeks or whatever, I'll reach out to them. Hey, how's the bite been? Is it the usual spots or do you see them in different areas? What's going on? So it's kind of nice to still have that network of friends that at times can help out. But there's always times where, I get a client that says, I want to fish this lake. Okay, well, I've never fished it, but, we can go. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee much, but, and there's times that it pays off and other times it's a little bit of a struggle bus, but it's fishing. So you just kind of never know.
That's true. Well, and I kind of like what you're saying. It seems like you're relying on your friends, where place that you've gone in the past, or how are they doing? Have they been there recently? And the reason that I really like that is I think so often people are afraid to have a fishing network. And I will even throw myself a little bit under the bus because when I get on a really good bite, like I hesitate to tell people because people, I think, especially with social media, are tuned into like, oh, your lake is going to be ruined. Don't share anything, and look at Josh's face because Josh would share everything with everybody if I let him. Isn't that funny? We're like kind of opposites in that way. But what you're doing is using this in a way that you're sharing with people and maybe they're sharing back. And what that does is that makes everybody kind of a better angler.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's kind of one of those deals. There's a smaller, tight network where, okay, if I give this person some info, maybe I don't need anything now, but if I come up during an off time of year that I'm not used to a body of water that I know that they fish that body of water. So, and with the tournament world, that also comes into play because so many guys are from all over the country that, we meet and we get to be friends with. And, if I'm going to a body of water or even pre-fishing for a tournament, I may have never fished on that body of water, but the chances are I know somebody that's fished it in a previous year for a tournament, or even maybe the year before, or even sometimes months before. So it's always kind of nice. I've always said, in this industry, and you guys know that as well. The fishing industry is really small. People think it's this huge conglomerate of all these millions of people. It really isn't. I mean, we all kind of pretty much know each other. We all know what everybody's brands are that they're associated with, but we still eat dinners together. We joke around, so it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who anybody's with. We're still all friends because we're all still connected to the outdoors. So that's our common ground that makes us bond.
Yeah, but I know that you catch fish because you use JT rods.
And don't forget, I only catch fish in nice weather, according to you.
So you bring that up, and I'm sitting here waiting for Emily to bring this up because I know that I've heard a little bit of the story, and I'm sure you're sick of telling this story already, but I'd really like to hear a little bit about how, all of this information that you're talking about, like, helped you win that championship, the MWC, right?
Yeah.
And like, can you walk us through that day a little bit and like how, like, did you get some help from people or like how did that work for you?
So my partner was Curtis McCormick, who lives right out here by McConaughey, where I'm at. So he had fished sharp when he was 16 years old. So it was a long time from the time we were up there. We kind of didn't have much for intel because there were so many people that we knew in the area that by coincidence or acquaintance kind of knew somebody else was fishing it. So everybody was pretty tight-lipped because of that body of water. And to be honest, like our pre-fish, it was so windy that some of our spots that we thought we could get some decent fish never produced any kind of sizable fish that we could rely on. And day one, you know, we were after the end of day one, we were in 15th place. And Curtis and I, we got done fishing that day and went back to the hotel room and just kind of just started digging on our phones. Like literally started looking at like, okay, is there an article that was ever written on sharp this time of the year? Was there ever in fisherman, like anything and everything. And day two, we went back to a spot that we were at day one, and it was the same quality of fish, like your cookie cutter 15, 17s. And we knew where we were sitting that we had to swing for the fence. So it's kind of out now. We were in the spill basin. And when we got into the spill basin, we had heard that people tried it and there was no fish in there. And we looked, and there is a team that was fishing the bridge pylons, and we're like, okay, whatever. We just kind of trolled through and looking at our graphs, and we're in Curtis's Ranger, and he smacks me on the arm and goes, look. And I looked at the 2D, and it's the nice big arcs suspended with some bait fish. And he looked at me and goes, this guy look like McConaughey walleye. I wonder if we can get him with pulling cranks. And I said, well, let's give her a try. And literally that's how we got our spot for, and somebody's like, you know, wasn't a grind of what it was in a nutshell is being comfortable with the electronics that we use all the time. Curtis is a guide too. And knowing when you mark a fish, knowing that fish is a walleye, like there's times people are like, oh, you don't know. You know, when you see them with bait fish, you just know. And then the second part was, you know, he's a really good troller. I'm a really good troller. We're pulling lead core, which is both in our wheelhouse. And lo and behold, day two, you know, we waited till everybody else waited because we had 2 overs, and we knew being there to have 2 overs on that body of water is a unicorn. And so when we weighed and they said, you're day 2 leaders, we were both kind of in awe and just kind of shook our heads. It really didn't sink in until we got back to the hotel room. And then we're like, okay, now what? We're like, well, we're going to do repeat. We're going to go right back to the same place and grind it out. That's all we had. And it didn't dawn on us until day 3 that the team that we seen in the same location jigging by the bridge pylons was a second place team that was behind us by 8 ounces on day 2. So it got us a little nervous. We only caught on day 3, the final day, we only caught 5 fish. And they came, the first one, I made the joke, I've said it before, the first one was a sauger. It was like 16.5-inch sauger. And if anybody knows saugers, they're a torpedo. They don't weigh much. You take a 16.5-inch walleye and he'll almost weigh another pound heavier than a sauger. And we have, you know, you get 8 fish total in your wide well. So you have some to burn. And Curtis looked at me and I'm like, we got to throw it in there. But I swore before this tournament started that we wouldn't keep a sauger because they are so thin that you cringe. And it wasn't until like 1 o'clock before we actually caught our 1 over. And now, mind you, we had to be in at 3:30. And at 3 o'clock, the team that was in second place took off at like 2:45 from the bridge pylons. And we just kind of both looked like, did they go into weigh already because they had theirs? When it's that close, you kind of, and we were just like, no, we're just going to keep grinding out. And we literally left the spot with our 5th fish. I think it was like 5 seconds before we had to leave there. And when we pulled into the check-in mark for them to see us come into the bay, it was like 47 seconds before we would have been I mean, we pushed it to the limit. But, and I relate all that back, that it's that no matter what electronics you use, if once you use it all the time and you get comfortable with it, and if once you know your electronics, that's one less the equation that has to be something you worry about. When you mark fish, you're like, oh, I know what that is. And again, for us, pulling lead core is something we do. So we're like, sure, we know the fish are at whatever feet they were. We know how many feet back with these stick baits. We knew we were pulling at X amount of speed. So it wasn't, you don't worry about the variables. Now you just worry, are the fish going to bite? Because we all know, in this day and age, without opening a can of worms with forward-facing sonar, people go, oh, you catch fish all the time. We all know that use forward-facing sonar, different electronics. There's times fish just don't bite. So
yeah,
it's kind of funny that, you just pray that they're going to bite, and you got the right color, the right speed, and you just kind of have to trust. Once in a while, you just kind of got to go, yep, this is what we're doing. It's going to work or not. So it was very great for us that it did pan out. My family was there for the weigh-in. In fact, I had my 3 kids on stage. Jake was on stage with me, along with the twins, and Curtis had his kids on stage with him. So, we both agreed that it doesn't matter what levels or what we win later in life. That will be pretty hard to beat with having our kids on stage for the final weigh-in of that day was pretty epic. So.
Oh my gosh. So, we started talking earlier in this podcast about how, when you're fishing so many different bodies of water and you're using your network, and sometimes that's people and you're calling them up and all of that. And then what I heard is during this one tournament after day 1, maybe there weren't more people to call or whatever. And so what you did is that you said that you turned to the internet. And the reason that I'm so inspired by this is because it applies to everybody. I think so often people get stumped on bodies of water or want to do better, know that they can do better. There's better fish in here and they're just catching, what they are considering subpar or something. And so I love the fact that you were able to scour around and find information that you were able to apply to yourself in a way that you could, use your confidence baits or whatever, find a spot, and just put those puzzle pieces together. Because, I know every day is kind of a gamble going out fishing. Will they bite? Will they not? Will you find them? Will you not? But that's especially hard when you already feel like you're up against the odds. And so when you're in a tournament and you're not doing well, I think it is super, super cool that you guys were able to not just shut down, but have the confidence to go out and try something different, because that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. And, and part of that is also just hours on the water, and I always tell people when they start asking, I get, a lot of us that travel, even guys that guide on a home body of water, we always get people that, no offense, we always call it, they call or they want the free information, instead of just booking a trip, and I always give some sort of tip of some sort. It may not be the best tip, and it may not be a tip that's current. It might have been a bite that was a week ago, but it's something at least for them to maybe put, use it on a technique or something the next time. And, we all kind of defer to the social media. And I think a lot of people forget about the articles that In Fisherman, it is really, if people really look at In Fisherman and look at all the bodies of water they've written articles on, it is mind blowing. They're from up around Bemidji, Minnesota, and it's people I don't think understand the amount of travel that they had done over. I don't even know how many years now they've been writing articles. But if you look, if it's a pretty good sized body of water, I would almost bet that there is an article by in fishermen at some point in time on that body of water.
Mm-hmm.
That's like really crazy to think about. Be cool because I get caught in the mindset where I think for a lot of people, social media is disposable. And I think there's so many people out there and they try to follow like these different, I don't know, fishing outlets and where they get information. You know, it's not just seeing fish. Everybody can catch fish or post fish or like whatever, fine. But when you can learn information and take that and apply it, I mean, that's what people are really looking for. But I think what you're saying is that even I mean, like, don't view it as old, you know, because so much of the stuff is good information. And so dig back on your favorite bodies of water. And you know what's funny is, okay, so Josh and I actually before this is crazy. We were like rock hunting. That's a whole different story for a whole different day. But I kept making jokes about how like the rocks don't change or like the rocks didn't move. Like they've been there for like a million years, like literally. And so fish haven't been there for maybe a million years because I know that's crazy. But, you know, when you look at an article that's written in, I'm going to go really crazy, 1950, you know, I'm saying don't use every bit from that article, but some of those fish tendencies, some of those tips, some of those different things are so worthwhile, so worth looking at. And actually, you know, sometimes they'll suggest like a bait or a technique that maybe you didn't think of. And when that is what works on that body of water, oh man, you never know what you're going to find. And that's super cool.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that. And I think that a lot of times we as anglers, and myself included, get in our own ways, right? And so you're trying to figure out like, oh, what's the tactic? And I think social media has really clouded the water and like, oh, we got a drop shot or we got to do this crazy rig or we got to do this. And like, you know, if you're comfortable with a technique, there's no shame in catching fish like that. You know, if you're having a tough day and you need to catch fish, or like in your case, like you guys were just happen to be going over a spot and you're like, recognize the situation as something that you could do and you didn't try anything crazy. You just went back to what you guys were comfortable with and it paid off for you. And I think that can happen a lot of times for the everyday angler. You know, just go back to what you're comfortable with. And then once you kind of figure out the puzzle a little bit, then you can start experimenting. And I think that'll bring a lot of people quite a ways in there trying to catch fish on almost any body of water.
Yeah. And I think at times, I think social media is great. Don't get me wrong. It helps a lot of people, and like YouTube, you know, there's so much you can learn on it. But there's always that you cannot learn without actually doing. And I think that's one of the problems that social media, in essence, has caused a lot of fishermen that are starting out, is that you see how else person A, B, C, or D, or E, or et cetera has done that past week by what they're posting. Okay. So now that person goes out and they feel like they're not as good because they didn't have the pictures to post, or because, you know, they didn't have a good, you know, they didn't get a limit. And I think that can go a long ways in what, you know, like even you guys see in your area, this kind of depletion of some of our fisheries, because some of these people think that it's more about posting limits instead of just knowing that it's the time on the water, you know. And if it may be where somebody catches an oddball fish that you don't usually catch with that technique, that steals the day for the memory. I think once people realize that when you get back down to it, I hate to call this out this way, but if we all were real truthful, a bobber probably catches more fish than anybody want to recognize. Like
in my boat, definitely it does.
Well, and I know, like, there's different times of year slip bobber fishing for walleye. Like I can take the same rig I got for walleye fishing and I can go out with the kids and we can go chase crappie and it's the same setup. So I think we kind of, some of the social media and some of the advertising with, you know, and we all know, like, there's so many somebody don't believe how much tackle there is, they can come onto my boat and open a compartment. Like there's Plano boxes full of, I made the joke, or my son made the joke. We were loading our new boat and I said, grab any Plano box in the garage, bring it out to me. And he's like, Dad, what are these? And they're Slogos by Lunker City. And if anybody bass fishes, like, and it's probably hard to believe, but I used to be a serious largemouth bass fisherman. Like when I was in high school years, that's all I wanted to target. I have a Plano box full of Lunker City Slogos, and they're not the easiest to find out. And I have a Plano box full of them, and it's in my boat. Why? Because you just never know when that weird bait or it's a different technique that you haven't used for a while that you could just pull out of thin air and it works. So I think it's kind of funny when you start looking at all these different types of baits. Still at time, the bobber and a jig and a hook or a leech or a night crawler is still very, very, very productive. And I know people, especially that chase pike, still, they use balloons with circle hooks and heavy northerns or suckers, or depends on the region you're in, but it's still the same principle. So and it's not always about, having a certain type of crankbait or chatterbait or drop shot. If somebody wants to start out, I just kind of chuckle and be like, you just need a bobber and a hook. Like you'd be surprised, especially when there's kids involved. A child doesn't care the size of a fish. They don't. They just want to reel in something, and it's, I think that's one of the things that I wish more social media would help people out with, is like maybe giving more tips on a nice panfish bite for the kids, or something that's a little bit more aggressively, like one after another, to get kids involved. And I would like to see more lakes, and I don't know of any right now in my area, but I would love to see a kid only lake to where you can't take a limit, but kids fish for free, and it's stock full of panfish, like nice big bluegills and crappie, and they can just fish off a pier, and one after another would be something that I really wish we had. And I know there's some places in this country that they have, like, I think they call them catch ponds or trout ponds or something, where you buy like a day pass and it's a private stock deal. I think that's a great deal, because then it gives people a little bit more confidence of just, as simple as baiting a hook. Some of us take for granted just threading a night crawler on. Like I helped my son's PE class. They went fishing, and I went and helped the students learn how to fish and take fish off and put a night crawler on. And
did you bring your trophy with so they can hold that?
No, I didn't. It's I can tell you though, without getting too far off that track, my twin girls, I have had to take the trophy and the ring and my new boat to show and tell to school. So, but my son's class, I think I literally took for granted on just the simplest thing of how to put a night crawler on a hook. Like we take it for granted, we do it so much that we think everybody should just know how to thread a night crawler on a hook. Like I at first I was like, what do you mean you didn't know how to put a night crawler on? And I watched a girl lay a night crawler down on the dock and stab the night crawler with a hook. So it was like two little chunks was on the hook, and she threw the whole thing out. And I'm like, that's gone.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, it's on there. And I'm like, yeah, the first time a fish bites that, it's gone. So, that's one of the things that why I always tell people, I'm like, you can always defer to a bobber and a hook, because it has a lot of applications that do produce very good results.
Okay, and I think that the poor bobber is maybe just a victim of bad branding, because when you think about it, if you instead change the word bobber to float, all of a sudden you can be a serious fisherman. No, I don't use a bobber, but yes, I have float systems on my boat.
Another good one I like is cork. That's you walleye guys like to call it corking.
Yeah,
and I just think that's really funny that I'm gonna go power cork.
And I've never understood that. Like it's just crazy. Like, even from where you guys are to where I'm at, just certain things are called differently. And then I literally had some guys that hired me that were from Texas, and they called bluegill perch.
Oh,
And I was like, no, that's a bluegill. He goes, oh no, where we're from, those are perch. I'm like, well, you can call them perch all you want, but we have yellow, white perch, yellow perch. Like, nope, those are perch. And I'm like, okay, we'll agree to disagree. We'll call that a perch for the rest of the day. But to me, that's a bluegill. So
That's so crazy, all those regional differences. That's so funny. So we were joking before about your trophy, and I think that Josh got distracted and pulled up maybe one of my favorite pictures of your son ever.
Oh.
So are you going to show this here?
I suppose.
Oh, we're queuing it up.
Whoops. Where did it go? There it went.
there it is. I see it.
Oh.
That's funny. It's on our screen like really big, and now this one you just have all these random pictures.
Yeah.
Let's do this again.
Let's see if Josh can get this figured out. You gave me all this credit for figuring out my technical issues.
Oh, yeah.
There it is. Oh,
And it's heavier than you think.
It is way heavier than you think.
yeah. And that's it for people that are tuning in, don't know. My son he will replace me in a heartbeat. Like he knows his stuff, and he works the booth for JT, and he does even Lakewood, works some of the times for Lakewood, and he's learned a lot from me, but he's also learned a lot from social media, just diving into different things. But and if somebody would kind of take a little bit of time and figure it out, he'll confess that he didn't really understand what he watched or learned on YouTube until we went out to the boat, and then he tried it and he got to understand it. So, but it's kind of cool to see, that is I love that picture, because he doesn't always have the most joking, manner of him when it shows. He's usually, that he's pretty serious when it comes to shows, but for him to photobomb like that, I'm like, that is awesome.
Oh my goodness. We do really love running into him. And I actually really like what you're saying, or what he was saying about how you don't really understand something until you do it, because you're right. Like, there is a lot of information out there, but until I'm able to take it and like connect with a fish, I mean, how much sense is it really making to me? So I really love that idea that you learn those things online, and then you try it, and then once you can do it, then you feel like you learned it. That's cool. Few comments from the comment section. So a bunch of people checking in and saying hello. So people are excited to see you. So hello to all of those people.
Yeah, our buddy Troy's up in Canada.
Yeah.
So he'll be taking some of our walleye information up there, it sounds like, on Saturday for the opener. And then our buddy John over in New York we were just talking about doing bobber fishing. So he's taking his grandson out. And so that's super cool. John was catching walleyes earlier this spring, and so it's cool that he can get his grandkid on some fish with the bobber.
Well, and maybe Tom can speak to this a little bit, because you know way more about walleyes than I do. But one of the things that I am learning from talking to people actually on this podcast recently, actually, is walleyes hang out a lot more shallow than I realized this time of the year. So you had mentioned way earlier in this podcast, all you have to do is kind of like start breaking down water, look between 3 and 10 feet. If they're not there, then, and you went on. But so when we're looking for walleye, especially early in spring like this, are we looking shallow like that, or where are people going to start this weekend?
Well, and so without kind of throwing a curveball in it, that is generally, you're right. I mean, generally you want to start, 3 foot to 10 foot, and then kind of work your way that way. It all goes back to the ecosystem. Where there's bait, there's fish. Like, there are predator fish, and a lot of people don't even understand that, They don't think of crappie and bluegill as a predator fish. And it's so you got to kind of go back and just think that if the bait is all shallow, your fish are going to be shallow. We used to think as walleye fishermen that if the sun was out, the walleye were in 85 feet of water on the very bottom, they didn't go nowhere. Well, the way technology is and the way tournaments and articles have been written over time and people starting to be a little bit more vocal about it, we've learned that that's not always the case. You can still have, different bodies of water to where the fish are still not shallow yet. For instance, out here, Lake McConaughey, most of these fish are still deep because they're chasing LY, which that's their forage base that they're eating on. And I just don't think, everybody goes by what the general consensus is. You kind of have to know a little bit about that body of water. But generally speaking, especially for those like from Leech Lake area, Cass Lake, Minnesota, all the way down through, yeah, you're going to be starting kind of shallow, pitching paddle tails, jigging a minnow, maybe even some spot tail shiners from time to time, kind of depending on where you're at and what their forage base is. But it's unreal on, I think, how shallow a lot of fish do feed. I think we've all kind of got this weird conception that everything's got to be around like crappie. A lot of guys would be like, oh, they're suspended in a basin and that's where they're at. Well, there's a weed bed and it's the only weed bed in the lake and it's in 5 foot of water. That's where the crappie are going to be. So that's where also it goes back to your electronics. Like if you go to a new body of water, drive around, side scan, down scan, 2D, GPS, mark stuff. You can always go back to it. Even if it's not even a good waypoint, if you just see something and you don't know what it is, drop a waypoint, because it could be a pot of fish. It could be weeds, but you take the time to go back later and you go, oh, it's just a weed bed. Well, now that, oh, it's just a weed bed turns into, oh, it's a weed bed. So now I need to look and see what's around there, and understanding electronics is, I cannot stress that enough. There's a lot of people that have, I think, gone over their head at times with electronics and never understand the operations of them. But yet they have an iPhone that they can sit there and they can tell you whatever it does and make it work and do whatever it needs to do. But yet they can't go into a setting and change the speed, of their graph. And, I'll kind of say it out loud. A lot of people don't like knowing about it. It's kind of a secret in a sense. You can speed up your graph, especially on side imaging. And if let's say you're driving around 3 to 4 mile an hour. If you bump that to 7 to 8, it increases the picture size of the fish and what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. It's because you're taking, by going 3 mile an hour, that object shows up at whatever size. But at your screen size, when you're trying to have it pass through the screen at 7 to 8 mile an hour, the only way it can project that by going that fast is to enlarge the picture. So it works really well for like sandgrass, weed beds, spawning beds. Bass guys have known this forever, that they speed up their chart speed. And it's because they'll drive around and look for bait all the time. So it all kind of defaults to that. Know your graphs, get whichever one that you're comfortable with. If you're a Lowrance guy, get Lowrance. You're hummingbird. I don't care. But whichever one you're going to get, figure it out. If you don't understand it, there is plenty of people. I do electronics training 101 around my area. There is plenty. I mean, it's getting very popular, especially with live scope. It's hire them for the day. You're going to learn so much by somebody that runs these systems day in, day out, that, you think you may know. And then this person's going to do this option, and then you're like, I didn't even know that screen existed. How'd you get it to do that? It's like having a computer tech work on your computer or do something, and they open a window and move something. You're like, how'd you do that? And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. So I think you can never stop learning how to adjust your electronics. And then just when you think you know how to do your electronics, then we could go into a whole spiel and put multiple transducers and run them to the same head unit to get better pictures on side imaging. Like it is going down the wormhole when you start going in electronics. It's just reconfirming that know your electronics and start out shallow and work your way out. And you'll be surprised, how quick you will find fish just by driving around and graphing, like just casually driving around, looking, marking a few things. And then next thing you know, oh, there's fish. Oh, I caught a fish. Now I know why they're there. So
that's funny. Speaking of going down the wormhole, Chad is asking, where do you recommend to start for bullheads? Chad, did you miss our bobber conversation? Because maybe do that at night.
Well, for those of us that know Chad, he is on the JT staff with us, and he always gives me heck. But Chad, if you really need to know where to start for bullheads, I would say take a 1/4-ounce lead head jig, thread on an eye crawler. You can use up to 15-pound test, throw it out on the bottom, sit it in rod holder, and don't touch it until line moves. That's my best recommendation for bullheads. It's guaranteed to work.
Guaranteed to work. Oh my gosh. And I guess I should have asked this before when we were talking about it, but I feel like I can't let the show end without asking you, as far as your tournament, you've mentioned your JT rods. Were you using JT rods when you won the tournament?
So we had 2 of the Ascendants, and then our main ones that we're using out the sides of the boat, unfortunately, were not JT rods because we don't make 12-foot JT rods. So we had 12-foot 2-piece rods out the side. And that was mainly to get out away from the boat because we were afraid some of the fish we were driving right over may spook off to the sides. So, and I keep on, I'm a main guy for component for asking for the 5-foot trolling rod and for the 12-foot trolling rod. We'll get there. There's just so many different applications that I know JT can't make a rod for every application, but it is a huge component. And just kind of reading the comments. So my partner this year I'm fishing with, Dave Landsteiner, actually just posted, just caught a 30-inch walleye in 3 foot of water. So he's out fishing today, and he sent me some Snapchats. So yeah, it's crazy how shallow you can catch them at times.
That is crazy. Oh my goodness. So I do have to ask before I let you go. What's your next adventure coming up? What do you have coming ahead of you?
So the end of this month, I go to David and I are fishing MWC this year to qualify for next year's championship, and we'll be fishing at Winnebago. So that's the next. I got another group for 3 to 4 days booked for next week. In between different tournaments, I am guiding, and then in between that, it's Jake's baseball, the Twins softball, graduation parties. It's there's times that I just get lost. So, and I just, yeah, it's been a very, very good year, and I can't do it enough without my wife and the support I get and my family. It's and as of course, she commented earlier when I said how many miles, she said, I can confirm that. She does put up with a lot of the stress, and as a tournament angler and a guide, especially the way I guide, it can be stressful just because of the amount of times I'm away from home. But it's been a very rewarding journey the last few years, especially since I went and did this full time. I don't think there may be a few people that know, but I guide for a living. So whether it's ice fishing or open water, this is what I do full time. It can be grueling, and there's times that, you know, we get beat down, but like I tell so many people, I'm a part of people's memories, and to be a part of somebody's memory that just caught their first fish, their biggest fish, their first species of that fish, or whatever it may be, that is something that I think we kind of take for granted at times, because when they tell a story, now you're a part of a story they're told, and you're involved in it, and then that could be told to their grandkids or great grand. Next thing you know, I'm talked about in, you know, some story about somebody caught some fish 3 generations later, and it's just because they were in the boat with me. So I think that's a special thing that I get to be a part of, and I get to see some people that get overexcited for fish that I know I've taken for granted at times, that, you know, you forget some people haven't caught a certain species, or one that's, you know, a certain size or whatever. And it's pretty cool to see somebody when they get that fish in their hands and they're just going ballistic, you know, and you're taking pictures and you're like, that made the day. That makes up for the days where we get beat up by hail and bounced around in the boat and tossed and turned and sunburnt, windburnt, hungry because, you know, we forget to pack something one day and we eat on cheese sticks and Gatorade for, you know, 12 hours, you know, but at the end of the day, I feel very blessed that I get to do what I love, and that's be in the outdoors. So there's no complaints from me at any given time. So.
Well, and it's hard to not feel inspired by your passion. So for people who are still looking to set up summer plans and maybe book a guide trip, do you still have availability coming up here?
Yeah, I have. It's spotty in some months, and like come August, I think August, September timeframe, we start in on booking for ice fishing trips because that goes so quick too. So yeah, it's pretty easy. You know, somebody can find me on all social media outlets, TomTom's guide service. And I know you guys will probably have some sort of link up or something also, like you guys do down the road or whatever in your deal. But I always try to get back. I answered a phone call today on a guy that was fishing with his grandpa and his live scope wasn't working. So I always try to get back with people and help you out as much as I can. And I always tell people, just know that when you call, there's a pretty good chance I'm next day, but I always return phone calls and emails.
Awesome. So hopefully everyone is going to be calling you and booking a trip, because that's going to be a whole bunch of fun. For those of us maybe who aren't able to get on the books, I know we are going to be watching your adventures. And I think Josh is putting a few links to your website and stuff in the comments now, so people will be able to just click on that. So if you're joining us from Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever else, that is something that you will be able to do. And Tom, I just really appreciate that you were here tonight to talk about all of this with us. I feel like I learned a lot and I had a lot of fun.
No, and I thank you for having me on, and I'll have to let Jake know that I got to see you guys. He'll be a little jealous because I know how much he likes visiting with you guys, and I'll have one of these days we'll just have to set it up to where Jake can be on your guys' cast, because that'd probably be kind of a fun deal to get a
that would actually be awesome.
It'd be super awesome.
He always asks, have you seen Josh Emily? I'm like, no, I haven't been doing another show yet, bud. So when I told him I was going to be on this podcast down here, he was pretty stoked about it. So I'll make sure to let him know.
Oh my gosh. Well, shout out to him. And that will be a future guest here. We're looking forward to chatting with him.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, thanks so much for that suggestion and for helping set that up. So man, that'll be a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Cool. And like I said, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Mm-hmm.
And to the people at home, thank you guys for joining us as well, because that is always a big part of the fun. If you are watching this, even when we're not live, and you have comments or questions, make sure to still drop that in the comment box, because we will probably still get back to you. And otherwise, we're looking forward to seeing you on next week's edition of The Night Bite.
Night, everybody.